welcome to all of you at a prestigious annual management conclave, Prabandhan 2024, organized by Department of Management Sciences, IIT Kanpur. We start with Vox Populi, an industry speaker panel discussion session where we invite eminent industry experts to speak on topics in human resource management, analytics, marketing, and finance to share their vast experience and knowledge with student community. Vox Populi serves as a nexus for the confluence of students and seasoned corporate professionals seeking to augment their expertise and broaden their horizon. Through the panel discussion, attendees can avail themselves of the opportunity to glean with insights and knowledge from experienced professionals who have navigated through the often turbulent waters of corporate realm. We are also thrilled to unveil a momentous milestone. DOMS IIT Kanpur has crossed the golden threshold of 50 glorious years, a half century of excellence, innovation, and leadership in education.
Taking a note of that, today the panel will share their insight on ESG risk assessment, identifying financial risk associated with environmental and social factors. ESG risk assessment is pivotal for identifying financial risk from environmental, social, and government factors critical to sustainable investing. It scrutinizes companies' handling of ecological challenges, social responsibilities, and governance ethics, which are crucial for the financial health. This approach helps investors spot firm, adapt at managing ESG risk, and promoting sustainable investments. By pushing companies towards sustainable practices, ESG risk assessment aids in aligning financial performance with sustainable development, making it an indispensable tool for investors aiming for long-term profitability and ethical investments. First and foremost, we are delighted to host our panelist and moderator for Vox Popular 24, Parvati Nilakanta, an assistant finance professor at the IIT Kanpur. Before joining IIT Kanpur, she was an assistant professor of finance at Dublin City University Business School. Her research lies in the area of environmental finance and financial data science. Her papers have appeared in the European Journal of Finance, Economics Letter, and the Spring Book Applied Operations, Research, and Financial Modeling in Energy Practical Application and Implication. Ma'am is also an associate editor of the Taylor and Francis Journal of Statistics. We are extremely delighted to have you on board in our panel today, ma'am. Thank you for being a part of Vox Populi.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Next up, I would like to introduce you to Sanket Agarwal, Executive Director, CFO Services. He is a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India and IFRS certified by Association of Certified Chartered Accountants, London. He has 17 plus years of experience servicing large national and multinational clients in statutory audits, financial reporting, and accounting advisory. Sanket sir has also experience working with overseas colleagues in US, UK, Australia, Singapore, etc. Worked with another large global accounting firms as a part of the accounting advisory team and a short-term secondment in the Netherlands office. He has experience working with many industries including real estate and infrastructure, IT, private equity, etc. He is a regular speaker in large public forums and a regular invitee by various institutes and financial forums to share his knowledge. Thank you, sir, for your esteemed presence. On behalf of IIT Kanpur, we are delighted to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for this opportunity.
Next up, we would like to introduce you to Mrs. Neha Gupta. Neha specializes in the merger and acquisition, PE, and family office practices. She has over 16 years of experience across corporate mergers and acquisitions, and private equity transaction as well as business reorganization, domestic as well as multinational. Having participated in a number of cross-border and domestic transactions, she has been a rank holder through ICAI and ICSI professional examination and is also a winner of the most coveted Deloitte CEO Award. Ma'am, thank you for being a part of Vox Populi 2024. The IIT Kanpur family feels really honored to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for having us here. I think we feel the pleasure and the warmth that you all have extended to us on this platform. Thank you.
Next, we would like to introduce Mr. Seshadri sir. He is a seasoned business and finance leader. He is CFO and finance director, General Mills, with nearly 2 decades of expertise acquired from esteemed multinational corporations such as P&G, Johnsons & Johnsons, and General Mills. Throughout his career, he has excelled in various challenging roles, including general management, business strategy, change management, finance co-planning, supply chain finance, merger and acquisitions, and growth strategy. His wealth of experience empowers him to adaptively navigate intricate and diverse business environments, constantly delivering measurable results and steering organizational success. So thank you for your presence. We are honored to have you amongst us today.
Thank you. It's my absolute pleasure to be here.
So without further delay, I request Ms. Parvati Langanta, ma'am, to kickstart the session. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, sure. So, but before I start, I'd actually like to thank all the panelists on my behalf and on behalf of the audience for taking the time to actually interact with us. It's a great pleasure to have you all with us. And I and the students, we very much look forward to learning your insights and thoughts on ESG risk assessment. It's a very timely issue, and we're really looking forward to what you have to say. So, yeah, so I mean, as we all know, corporations are now increasingly embracing stakeholder capitalism and they're moving away from the financial shareholder primacy. So, in this regard, it's very important that companies translate their goals into practical, measurable, and tractable ESG components in their businesses. For instance, in one of the Bloomberg reports, it states that the global ESG assets could exceed $53 trillion by 2025. So it's imperative that we understand how the failure to effectively manage ESG issues in businesses can lead to, say, a range of financial, legal, and credibility issues for the company. So with that in mind, I'd actually first ask Sheshadri, just wanted to know what is your view about the role of ESG in risk management?
Thanks, thanks, Parvati, for the question. Hello, everyone. So let me give my 2 cents first on ESG as well, and maybe even before that, give you a bit of context in terms of General Mills as an organization. The reason I want to give it is so General Mills is a US MNC. It's a food company. So our flagship brand in India is Pillsbury, and General Mills has been actually pioneer in ESG reporting. So globally, this is our 52nd year of ESG reporting, and you can imagine that a lot of large companies even today are not evolved in terms of either measuring ESG, either having it as part of their core strategy, and reporting, of course. The reason I say is that, see, for me, I think ESG should not be seen only as a compliance. So there can be many risks which we see organizations go through if they see only it as a compliance measure, as a reporting need. And you will see examples. So there was an example of Volkswagen trying to, in terms of the emission measures, globally, do you understand? So they paid a penalty of 30 billion in that entire episode. Now, see, from a risk standpoint, of course, the financial risk is 30 billion, but a lot of it also has to do with reputational risk. So any organization, and you will have risks like that, which can wipe out 20 years of profits, 30 years of profits, right? Because if you are trying to manage ESG as more of a compliance need versus integrate it, then I do see organizations suffering because of that sort of strategy. And when we say ESG, see, I think we need to be clear in terms of it's not restricted only to environment, right? It's environment. So I would broadly put it into people when we say social. When we say environment, I would say put it into planet, and then in terms of governance, right? So broadly, these are the three things. And pretty much, if you see any organization, more so in terms of FMCG, but any organization, they will be touching upon these three factors. They will be impacting either environment. They will, of course, they have people as part of their organization as well, and they will be interacting with a lot of stakeholders. So it's extremely important for organizations to view it holistically. And again, as an example, so there are multiple, and let me take an example of General Mills itself. So given that we are a food company, one of the ESG um, objectives which we have taken is regenerative agriculture, right? And why do I say regenerative? Like, what does regenerative agriculture mean? Uh, in a layman words, the output of a particular land needs to be increased and needs to be can be taken for over a long period of time. So the production of a particular farmland, one in terms of water conservation, etc. So there will be multiple aspects to it, but the intent is to get production or keep it fertile over a longer period of time. What does that impact? What does that lead to? It controls deforestation, because the biggest reason for deforestation is increase in farmland and reduction of wild cover, right? So there are reasons like this which every organization which is closer, and given that we are a food company, it's important for us as a strategy to be core to our strategy. Reporting etc might be very different, and to similar lines you will find apparel companies where they want to give the not they want to give a very safe working environment to workers or ESC vendors. So you will find that in Bangladesh is a hub for making clothes or apparel companies. So they supply to global giants, right? But the working condition, so that in over last 2-3 years there was maybe even 5 years. So there was news in terms of working condition, particularly in that sector, and that actually so they are all external suppliers working for global giants, but then that impacted the reputational risk of global apparel companies. So it is extremely important even for the global companies to ensure that all the stakeholders within their realm are also having ESG as a core, right? Because the ownership lies in, I would say, the leader of the value chain. Generally, you will find the manufacturers, the larger companies are the leaders, or at least need to be responsible as the leader for the value chain. So there will be distributors, there will be vendors, there will be ESC suppliers. But then it's the onus, I would say, is on the manufacturer to ensure that things like ESG, risks relating to ESG are given importance, right? So my 2 cents, Parvati, is ESG is extremely important. It's consumers are, so there are a lot of studies. There are a lot of studies where consumers are actually willing to pay a premium to a product of an organization which has ESG at its core, and hence, and then there is a risk element to it as to how to avoid financial risk, how to avoid reputational risk. So I think ESG is much more, it's much more critical than being seen as a mere compliance requirement.
So Sheshadri, so you think that there is a long-term value creation for the company itself following ESG?
Absolutely. I think it's like a growth driver. So it's one of the growth driver for the company. The company can't okay, again, let me go back to General Mills. So General Mills is a 170-year-old organization, right? So there are many organizations which are more than 100 years, right? And 100 years, see, India is a 77-year-old country post independence. Now imagine organizations being 150 years old, 170 years old. If if you don't adapt to ESG, if the thinking is that there is no value creation in it, companies will not be able to sustain for such a long period of time.
Exactly. It's a very pertinent point. Building on that, I would like to ask Sanket. I just want to know, so like Sheshadri pointed out that it's very crucial to have ESG as a company's core risk. I want to know from you, how can a company actually integrate the ESG practices in the risk assessment procedure? Because it's
Sure.
a huge task. And ESG, there are three different pillars. So how do you incorporate all that?
Yeah. So I think, as Shishadri rightly pointed out, many factors into it. Uh, when you basically understand the importance of ESG and its monitoring plus risk assessment, it's very, very important to also, integrate your ESG practice into your risk assessment procedures. I mean, historically, we have seen that, even from the financial reporting perspective, uh, that, we as accountants, or maybe as an auditor, or maybe somebody who's using the financial statements for any reason, have been evaluating a lot of risk in terms of credit risk, liquidity, and many other. Of late, there have been a lot of standards also which has come up, and which somewhere guarantees or maybe requires you to disclose what's there in the ESG practices. And while you do that, how have you integrated that into your risk assessment procedure is an important task. I think for any company, and that's what at least I would feel, it's very important firstly to identify what are the ESG factors which are most relevant to them. I mean, Shishadri comes from a manufacturing background. I work in consulting. We both have different I mean, both the entities have different ESG factors applicable to them. Maybe natural resources may not be directly applicable to me in some sense, or maybe not that critical, but there are other important factors. So firstly, while you integrate that, it's very important firstly to assess what are those ESG factors which are very relevant for the company. This may include your environmental risk, your social responsibility, your labor practices, your governance structures, and many. Once you have determined these ESG factors, you need to also then quantify measurable metrics to it. I mean, as simple as, for example, applicable on a company like ours, employee turnover ratio. I mean, in fact, today when we work with a lot of clients, there is a specific question which always comes up, which never used to come, 5 years, 10 years back, is that what is your employee turnover rate? So what, basically client is trying to assess is, do you have people working continuously on the assignments? Do you have, people who are, working with the organization for a longer period of time? And somewhere, it kind of also impacts your, overall service delivery, quality, everything. So, as I say, firstly, you determine ESG factors, you assign a measurable metrics to it, which would mean that how much of it is you would, say that these are under your control and may not pose a significant potential risk. But what is that, measurable matrix is what a company will have to define. Once that is done, there has to be a protocol or a process where all these parameters are being evaluated, are being monitored on a continuous basis. In fact, we have seen that a lot of companies today are creating ESG committees internally, and these committees are going through how these parameters are moving over a period of time, just to assess, are there any significant risk which that may come up in future if something needs to be fixed then and there. And there are various conversations around diversity, inclusion, carbon footprint, everything part of those discussions. So once that is done, one also needs to ensure that you covers the perspective of various stakeholders. So not just, when I say stakeholders, not just your shareholders, but your customers, your employees, the wider community you are addressing to. So everything of that will have to be tied together in a proper, mechanism into ESG factors, and should be, monitored on a regular basis. I think that can help any company to integrate, their practice into risk assessment procedures, and eventually, take a stock of it on a regular basis. Thank you.
So Sanket, thanks for the clarification on that. I just wanted to ask one thing. So Sheshadri also said that how important ESG is for a company's financial performance, but there's also quite a lot of evidence that shows that at least in the short term, it's still of a debate. So how, as a company, how do you manage this short-term, long-term trade-off between ESG performance and the company
Yeah.
performance?
I think very valid question. To be honest, when you speak to a promoter, in some sense, there is always a dilemma about your ESG performance versus your financial performance. For a promoter, to be honest, even today, and you would find many of them, the financial performance they believe is much more critical and important for them, or probably the only performance metrics which is important to them. But I think a lot of them in last many years have realized that if you are not kind of focused on your ESG performance and your ESG parameters, that will eventually come and impact you in your financial performance anyhow. uh, I mean, you will probably not be able to uh, grow in a way you may want to, because your customers are not happy, your markets are reduced. I mean, very recently, we've seen that there are a lot of economies like in UK, and in future we would see from 2027, I think, happening, that a company with a certain ESG ratings, I mean, maybe below that, will not be able to sell their goods to the customers over there. So you need to comply to those ratings in order to to be able to make your goods available in the market for a specific jurisdiction. And I would assume that this is something which will replicate to almost all the large economies, to all big companies in next few years. uh, so basically, if you are not taking into account your ESG performance and how you're performing on those factors, your people are not happy, your clients are not happy with you, or probably there is something which is in a natural, maybe you are supplying something which is creating a natural depletion of resources, and you're not ensuring that you're on the right path of it. It may attract a liability from a regulator later. So all those perspective, if you take into consideration, I think it's very important to mitigate all these ESG risk, and so that your financial performance is being driven in a manner in which you may want to. I mean, today, if you go to any private equity fund or a large institutional investors for seeking capital, they would do a thorough ESG review on you. I mean, due diligence is one aspect of it, more on the financial side, which was happening. But ESG risk and assessment and overall ESG diligence is another important factor. And unless and until you qualify in that, it's almost impossible today to raise a capital from any large institutional investors. We would see that happening maybe in a shorter term with some of the large banks, also some of the financial institutions. I mean, taking a loan for an organization, it's important to comply with ESG performance. So I think it's people have understood now that it's not possible for us to keep both of them apart. In terms of trade-off, I think if you're performing well on the ESG, the chances to perform well on the financial side is also significantly high. And we can also guarantee that if the ESG factors are not taken into consideration, the financial performance in some way or the other will get impacted.
Ah, yeah. So you mentioned about ESG rating. So I actually want to ask Neha about this. So there's companies, some companies voluntarily do some disclosure. They make use of all these ESG ratings, but there's also I feel there's a lack of transparency in those ratings. These ratings are quite heterogeneous. So I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, there's a lot of cases of greenwashing going on. So I just wanted to know what your thoughts on that. I mean, can firms play the game in the ESG ratings?
So yeah, thanks Parvati for the question, and a very warm greetings to everybody there. And though I cannot see the faces of the students, I hope they are keenly listening to us, and we're going to ask you questions at the end of the session. So coming to your question, Parvati, just taking on from Shishadri and Sanket, I mean, we have talked enough about the best practices which all of these corporates are following, have to follow under the umbrella of ESG. But having said that, as you also rightly indicated, that ESG, I mean, this is kind of a downside of how it is currently being implemented in India. There's very limited regulatory and legal framework which is there, and that's kind of only covering some listed organizations. And accordingly, I would say the control and kind of monitoring on those compliances, whether these corporates are following the best practices, they're taking into account the standards and the goals that they have set for themselves. This is not being monitored completely except for some large listed institutions, etc. And accordingly, I would say, in a rush to prove yourself ESG compliant, because the benefit of being ESG compliant cannot be ruled out, as Sanket very rightly mentioned, that it is now being perceived very differently, right from how, your financial models or valuation would be taking shape considering your ESG compliances, or how investors or any stakeholder is going to look at the company who's doing who's setting an ESG goal compared to a company who's not. So there are clearly, as you indicated, a mad rush for everybody to meet their goals and to show the ratings, and there are some of those unethical practices that's clearly going on, but I think it's only for a short while that something like this can continue, and slowly I think we are moving into to being an economy like that of an US or maybe Europe, wherein we would be having our own control framework to monitor, control all of these compliances, and also to issue ratings. So I think it's that transitionary period where this is getting misused, and it should not be done that way.
Yeah. So, Neha, you work a lot with M&A transactions deals. Just wondering, what is ESG? Do you notice in your own deals or some other companies, do you see that ESG is a big component in either the acquisition side or the target company side?
Give me a second. Yeah, can you repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just asking that you work a lot with M&A deals. So I was just wondering if ESG an issue, is that ever a consideration in making such a decision, whether to merge with a company, or how does that play a role in M&A deals?
Yeah, certainly. So before that, I mean, so for any M&A that we as a consulting organization are part of, there is a very robust target identification or a due diligence process which is there. And being there in this field for more than a decade now, I've kind of seen the transition from being a very orthodox or a very stereotype of a due diligence process to now kind of adopting this new age practices, wherein there was a time where there was only focus towards focusing on the environmental side of the diligences, but after being aware of the social responsibilities of the corporates, and also getting to understand about building a stronger governance in terms of how you want to maybe make your board, in terms of having independent directors, female participation, ensuring diversity and inclusion, and on the social part, uh, being aware of how you're contributing to the society, being aware of how your workmen or employees are feeling about the organization. These things have become so much important, and especially when we are dealing with a multinational organizations or a fund or an institutional investor, this has become a very important part of any M&A diligence or an exercise that we are currently doing. So whenever we are so it's kind of also found place uh, in our financial matrices that now we as an M&A organization are now using for identifying those visible acquisition targets and the targets having, I mean, in the process of evaluating those targets for a successful M&A deal, ESG credentials have a very, very important role to play. So, keeping aside the financial outlook and the commercial viability of the target, that cannot be uh, underestimated, but I've seen ESG credentials and how that corporate has set out its own framework with respect to compliance with ESG is picking up. And also when we are looking at, the due diligence processes, there are clearly those questions that are spelled out in the diligence processes wherein we're wanting to understand the environmental factor better as to how the target is engaging in appropriate environmental practices, how they are managing the environmental aspects of his business, like maybe energy, CO2 emissions, how are they looking at water usage and waste management? Are they, aware of how to adapt and manage the greenhouse gas reduction plans? Also, when we are moving with, the social awareness of the practices as part of the due diligence processes, some of these questions have become very, very important as to understanding how these targets are engaging in, say, unsafe or abusive labor practices. What do they think about diversity, equity, and inclusion? And also moving on to the governance part of it, I mean, do they have an ESG strategy or a framework in place? What is their policy and process in terms of dealing with an anti-bribery or an anti-corruption? How are these factors influencing key stakeholders? So these sort of questions I'm seeing is picking up more and more in the due diligences, and out of these findings of the due diligences, a very, very robust documentation is being taken, is being, just a second, sorry, it's a Saturday, so you have a little bit of disturbance.
It's
Yeah,
wonderful to
so
have more people.
yeah, I mean, he's also learning a bit of it. So in terms of having a robust documentation, and also when we are dealing on with the negotiation of the legal processes and the document, I've now seen in terms of having an indemnity or a reps and warranties, they're very clearly spelled out protocols set out as to how this target is going to define their ESG policy going forward. How do these two companies going to, evolve these practices? Is this target compliant with the policy already, or it is kind of prepared to be compatible and compliant with any ESG framework which is likely to come? And I mean, we know that those policies are clearly in the pipeline and will come for each and every corporate. And also as a follow-up strategy as to post deal, acquisition, etc., a complete follow-on the process, so that the brand reputation of both the organization, the acquirer and the acquiree entity, is very well taken care of. So I would say, so if I have to talk about Deloitte, not just about its internal ESG practices, but it has also come up as a new age consulting theme in the whole M&A process, wherein we have a dedicated team who's looking after helping clients in understanding the key features of ESG practices, and also helping in routing it and binding the M&A deal with all of these compliances.
Great. Yeah, you also mentioned that it's also important that what kind of ESG, what's the expectation in terms of ESG in the future. So how do you think, how can companies actually come up with a framework so that, I mean, because things are so dynamic, things are changing. So how can they anticipate what the future needs would be, and then accordingly, is that even possible to do?
So that's an interesting and a tricky question, because these practices are currently evolving, and nobody knows how it's going to shape up and how easy or difficult it's going to be for Indian corporates to be compliant with all of this. While some industries, some sectors might be more prone to being an ESG compliant entity, but not all of them. So herein, I would say that the process is going to be evolving, ever evolving, and one has to continuously monitor and track the laws that are existing and the compliances that are expected and how to maintain a certain rating, etc., how to build your credentials around it so that you are able to have a certain market reputation, you're able to increase your, that edge in the market, the competitive edge. So here is what, what I would suggest in terms of carving out an ESG strategy, maybe to monitor and comply it, wherein these companies would have to basically set up their ESG goals and targets, and that that would make sense only when you're collecting relevant data and you're agreeing on an ESG reporting framework. It would be to start with it would be internal at first, and eventually when there are laws etc to support it, there would also be an external reporting which could be periodical, monthly, quarterly, or maybe an annual exercise. And the corporates, the organization have to align their teams to do that and track and report the progress on these compliances. And eventually whatever happens throughout the year in terms of building the strategy and adhering to it, there should also be a responsibility to report back to your stakeholders. So maybe it should form part of your website, your disclosures, uh, part of your financial statements to report to your investors, shareholders, and as part of your reporting to the customers as to what you're doing, how you're doing, and what are your targets and plans around it. And what is the framework? Do you have a competent team inside? You're taking help of an ESG consultant to monitor the regulatory changes, understand the impact of it. So it is like a detailed exercise which is evolving, and one has to keep a control, a track on it and monitor it.
Thanks, Neha, for that. So related to this, I want to ask Sheshadri. Now there are lots of jurisdictions that are doing some kind of climate scenario analysis or climate stress tests. So do you have any experience? Does your own company do anything like that? Or do you think these activities are even useful exercises for companies in terms
Yeah,
of ESG?
thanks, Parvati. So in my experience, I have actually seen one of my earlier companies do it as well, and I'll share that experience. So, and it was what 15 years back. So it's not even a recent phenomena. So see a lot of there are these seismic zones, right? So there are a lot of areas which fall under high seismic zones, right? And if you see, there are government regulations particularly relating to if it is in a particular rating of a seismic zone, uh, then these are some of the structural requirements for you to construct a plant, right? So there are such requirements. Now if you see the way India requirements are, these requirements are maybe lower to what say a evolved market like US has. And so each country has its own way of requirements, right? So there are areas where it might be high, there are areas where it might be low. So now I was a young finance professional. So I was based in Baddi. It's in north of India near Chandigarh, and I was the plant finance leader. Right now, 15 years back. So now, pretty much, I think, unfortunately or so, Delhi has had a lot of earthquakes, or it keeps having. But 15 years back, it was at least there was not much of earthquakes at that point in time. But so one of the assessments which was done is from a manufacturing setup standpoint, what would happen if, and we had 2 3 big plants in Baddi at that point in time. So we also call it BCP, business continuity plan, and stuff like that. So what would happen if the scenario planning was what would happen if earthquake were to happen and the plant sort of gets operations get disrupted. So pretty much a big part of our portfolio was made in that plant. So then, of course, there would be sales loss, people impact because a large number of organization was based out of the financial impact. So a big analysis was done without having any history of big earthquakes in Delhi, right? At that point in time, you can imagine, see, even now ESG is a very, I would say, under-evolved concept in India. Doing it 15 years back, even the headcount or the people themselves felt that it is something which is we are trying to plan a scenario which may never happen. Is it even useful? Right, you can do a hypothetical situation which might happen some 5 years. Is it even useful to put so much of resources? And interestingly, the output of that plan was that the plant was able to withhold a particular richer scale. If I remember, I think five they were able to withhold, five and a half they were able to withhold, but they couldn't withhold seven if earthquake of seven comes in. The requirement was so even the require we were well above India's requirement, even at five. But at that point in time, the company decided to disrupt the operations. So we did it phase wise, like we completely didn't disrupt supplies, but they invested, I think, close to 15 or 20 million dollars to be to make it able to withhold that seven Richter scale sort of earthquake. Right now, for me and for the organization or even for the stakeholders, that actually showed a lot of character and investment the organization is willing to do in people, in the local thing for safety, for environment, right? And post which, so those things have helped. So pretty much, if you see after that, there have been lot of earthquakes. I don't think anyone close to seven has happened, but I think there is a lot of confidence in the continuity of the operations because they did that investment 15 years back, and the cost of disruption is much more now, right? It's see you need to see this from many lenses. So one, it's a listed company, right? The even investors, it gives a lot of confidence to investors if they see company taking these sort of initiatives, right? So that's one. It gives a lot of confidence to institutions because see, one thing is that a big all the FDIs and a big chunk of investment even in stock markets are institutions who are all long term investors, and hence it so when they see organizations taking such steps, so this is an MNC. Even take example, if an Indian company does this, it clearly shows a lot of the character of the organization, their focus, their strategy. So it talks a lot about this because end of the day, if you are evaluating an organization, it's just not about only its numbers. It's about much more in terms of its culture, the strategy, and it's much more well-rounded than this. Hence, I think in terms of all the climate stress, so now pretty much you see a lot of banks do it,
Yeah.
right? And you pretty much see a lot of banks do it, a lot of organizations trying to do it, and with such a volatile business scenario, I think it's become even more relevant because over the last decade, I think the volatility has reached to a next level. So even after doing a lot of this, I don't think we'll ever be able to simulate a situation like pandemic, right? We would have never, whatever simulation we might have done, it was something which we never encountered in history. And the memories, see, everyone has a very faint memory. So all the geographical sort of disruptions which are happening now,
Yeah.
right? I'm pretty sure we would not have simulated it 10 years back.
So you think
Right?
more and more companies
So, right?
should.
So more and more companies need to, because I do think a lot of disruptions and volatility will continue and will increase, be it natural thing or geographical sort of disruptions. So these will continue to increase, and for us to be relevant and sustainable in future, I think organizations, both the organizations themselves and stakeholders like institutions, everyone, they will start to do it more and more, and I do see the relevance of it.
It's great. So I think it's in the organization's own interest that they should start doing these, if they're not doing it already. So my last question before I open the floor to audience to ask questions, it's to Sanket. So Sanket, we touched upon a bit about financial reporting and disclosure. Just wanted to know, how do you see the role of ESG in financial reporting and disclosure?
Sure. No, I think, since we have covered the most part of it, even from the disclosure perspective, I mean, very recently, all of us know, June 23 is where, the International Sustainability Standards Board, published the first IFRS S1, and the name is General Requirements for Disclosure of Sustainability Related Financial Information. So, as I mentioned earlier, the regulators are working towards ensuring that, certain set of companies, start disclosing some of these parameters, and they want to bring uniformity, across, these set of companies to do it in a certain way. I mean, anybody can, do a disclosure, but through these standards, they have tried, giving it a specific requirements for an entity to disclose sustainability related financial information. Uh, the role is, I mean, overall, it is going to be very, very critical in future. As we all know, it's evolving right now, but the standards are applicable. I mean, 1st January 24, this is where, it starts coming applicable. Next year, we would see a lot of companies to which this is made applicable now will start disclosing in, a lot of these information. In some sense or the other, this will also be vetted by, the auditors who are kind of, certifying that. So there will be a lot of emphasis in terms of, assessment of these, disclosures, and also, from the company and from the auditors to ensure that these are being disclosed in the right manner. So I think overall, this is going to be very, very critical. It will bring in transparency, uh, you know, and accountability for people. If somebody has different factors, that will be disclosed as part of annual report. The risk management process will eventually be disclosed. The standard also requires you to also comment how do you manage these factors, what are the internal process through which you are managing some of these parameters. And this is not only relevant for somebody who is investing in or whose money is part of the company, but also somebody who may want to join. I mean, personally, if I were to join a new company, I would definitely want to at least see their ESG guideline, and that will give me an idea as to what is the thought process behind this overall organization. At least on the social parameters, how they're treating their employees, their customers, and all. It kind of gives you a flavor as to the kind of organization you will be moving to. It will be very relevant for investor decision making. So a lot of companies would be compared to one each other. Sorry, I think a lot of companies would be compared, and there will be a uniformity through which you can compare some of these organizations into similar industries together. Stakeholder communication will be very important. We would see a lot of these ESG related, discussions, and maybe, those long paragraphs also going in as part of DRHP in future. So I think this is, as the other co-panelists have also mentioned, this is evolving very significantly from the financial reporting standpoint. There's some steps which are already been taken, but I would personally, I can see that there are a lot of other those stuff which will come in future and will settle as part of your overall financial reporting. Thank you.
Yes, so thank you, all the panelists. And now, students, go ahead if you want to ask questions, and gain all the knowledge from our panelists, please ask your questions. So we have few questions already in the chat box. So maybe Akash Tripathi, why don't you unmute yourself and ask the panelists your question? Is Akash there? Okay, so Akash asks, so how can companies assess the long-term financial and reputational risks associated with ESG factors in M&A transactions? So maybe Neha, would you like to take that question?
Yeah. So that's an interesting one with respect to understanding the financial and reputational risk associated with ESG factors in M&A transaction. So as I said that we have already incorporated some of these processes as part of our due diligences, where we are applying our experiences and understanding of how ESG framework is currently being, made up, and what would be the impact of this on the company's profitability, valuation, brand, and reputational risk going forward if these standards are not met. So, on the environmental side, if the waste management or the water management is not being done properly, are there violation of the environmental laws or any other hyper local regulations that are there led by, implemented by the municipality or the local bodies, and what would be the penal consequences around it? What kind of reputational loss that it is going to cast onto that entity, by not being on the right side of the law. Again, on coming to the financial risk, this basically would be a comparative study wherein uh, any organization who's adopting these best practices would have a better, I would say, profitability ratios or a dividend ratios, because it would be able to churn some of the important matrices into generating better returns. Say if they are able to pro- procure raw materials which is more uh, sustainability friendly, or they are able to adopt a supply chain process or a manufacturing or a distribution process where it's more um, the carbon footprints are being managed, or the emissions into the environment has been controlled, then the whole cost of the product or the services that are being turned around is going to come down so drastically that the company's financial profitability sector is going to look very differently, and it becomes very easy for such companies to access capital, to have an investor fund, and to be able to utilize it for its expansion, maybe organically or inorganically. So if these standards are not being met through the studies, detailed diligence process, etc., we do put in an effort to assess the and quantify the risks that are involved in terms of estimating the financial risk, etc., and we try to utilize that in M&A transaction, maybe in the pricing adjustment, or also having some clauses built into the legal documentation which the parties are going to sign. So that's how at least these issues are dealt in the M&A transactions.
Thank you, Neha. There's one student, Bharadwaj. He asks, what are some of the current financial indicators for ESG risk, which can be quantified to use it for techniques like valuation of companies? Sheshadri, would you like to take?
Yeah. So let me try to actually build in actually on what actually Neha also said, and also try to answer this question as well. See, when you try to value a company, right, and see, valuation is even more critical, and one of the examples is we over the last 20 years I have evaluated few companies for acquisitions, right? So where the companies are valued, and in almost every instances the ESG uh, framework or the company's ESG strategy metrics is is one of the due diligence. So ESG is one of the due diligence areas which everyone undertakes, apart from financial due diligence, other type of due diligence. ESG is one of the very important due diligence which every organization takes. In terms of valuation of an organization, so I have seen it being a deal breaker. So I have seen, so in one of the instances, it was a target which had good revenue, good EBIT ratio, PAT. From a financial standpoint, it was good. But when the due diligence report throughout that the waste management was, so it's so detailed that you go to say last 30 years. So it's a very detailed sort of due diligence which gets undertaken, where you go to last 30 years of the plant operations, how is the waste management done, what is the impact it has had on the land nearing that plant, what is the diversity ratio in the organization, what are the working conditions. So there are various measures on which it's evaluated, and it became a deal breaker where we said no because they were not compliant. Even if we would have made them compliant, but given that they were not in the previous, it became a deal breaker. So from a valuation standpoint, it always and there have been instances where, because of a very good framework and very good uh, sort of ESG strategy, it plays on the valuation piece as well. See, end of the day, valuation in this context is what the organization is willing to pay to acquire the business, right? We talk about multiples and others. So that, and because end of the day, if they are not compliant, then you'll have to get in indemnities and others to cover your risk. So it is sort of related, and it does impact valuation. You might not be able to see it directly. If you want to do a direct correlation, see, India is not so evolved that you will be able to do a direct correlation. Even I would say developed markets. So for anyone, any investor, it's very difficult to make a direct correlation of saying that all of my, say, plastic which I use will be 100% recyclable. Right now, that's a measure. That's a, say, ESG measure. How will you correlate this to valuation of the company? The first thing you need to do is how will you correlate this to financial metrics of the company? Because you might end up spending more to ensure that you have that grade of plastic which is 100% recyclable, right? So if you want to do a direct correlation, it's not very intuitive. But if you take a longer view of things, you will then find that it is impacting the valuation, right? And hence these sort of metrics are very important. It definitely does in terms of M&A and other areas. Even standalone, from a valuation standpoint, these metrics are definitely adds to the valuation of the organization.
Thank you, sir. That answered my question.
So we'll take two more questions. So this one asked by Chiranjeev. He asks, how can global financial institutions handle the different ESG reporting rules in various places, making sure they follow the regulations and stay transparent worldwide? So I think people coming from MNCs are the right people to answer this question. So yeah, maybe Sanket, why don't
Sure.
you?
Yeah, I can certainly try. So I think it's a very important question because as you mentioned, multinational companies, uh, they operate. I mean, a firm like ours, Neha, Shishadri, they have multiple offices across multiple jurisdictions. We all know that these jurisdictions will basically pose companies to different challenges. The factors like waste, the pollution, some of the other, I mean, as simple as treatment of animals, or maybe some of the regulatory laws within those jurisdictions could be very different. So I think overall, for a global financial institution, it's important to have a specific ESG framework for each of these jurisdictions separately. uh, all those alterations in terms of some of the local factors that may add in will be critical to be incorporated in the overall framework they may have. Even in India, I mean, for that matter, if you have an operation based out of south versus you have in north, your ESG framework will have certain different indications. For example, what Shishadri mentioned, south, the earthquake, or maybe the chances of having it is slightly less or far less as compared to what's there in north. So I think a lot of these factors from the local perspective will have to be evaluated, will have to be incorporated in the overall framework, and then they have to be monitored, they have to be sort of ensured that they are followed to those respective jurisdictions. So overall framework in terms of maybe assessing everything together, and at the individual level will have to come in. Anything which goes off has to be reported in the overall report. So I think there is no option, but companies will have to do that, because that's where the risk lies, and there is no escape, I would say, from not doing it.
Thanks, Ankit. So one last question. So I think I'll take. Okay, so Sahil Gupta has asked a question that probably most students might want to ask the three of you. So he asks, could you give a roadmap to build skills for career in core finance job? Yeah, these students are getting ready to go into the workplace. So yeah, yes.
So
what
Parvati will have to do
motion?
another panel to discuss this.
Yeah,
probably.
yeah. Yeah, we'll be happy to host you again. But yeah, maybe one advice just for the students.
I think I can start, and then maybe thereafter Shishadri and Neha can chip in also. Uh, I mean, it's a good question, because it's important to be aware and seek ideas from some of us who are part of the organizations today. So roadmap to build skills for a career in core finance. I think finance, or maybe for that matter any other field today, is very very sort of impacted by technology integrations into it. While we even do risk, we are talking about ESG risk framework. You can't just do everything manually. There has to be process internally which are technology driven, which helps you sort of put right frameworks within the system to monitor. So I think while you obviously aspire to build your career in finance, having an eye on what's happening on the technology side of it is very critical, and that could be maybe one important suggestion I may have for all the students over here.
Thanks, Ankit. Neha, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so I would say that it's like I mean the question itself says that you basically need to make a roadmap for building the skills around it. So not just the relevant education which is required to choose that right stream or the right specialization into finance, because that's also very diverse and segregated. But as Sanket mentioned, that everything is now moving into more digitization, technology, advancement, analytics, and all of that. So maybe with an understanding of the core finance, having those problem thinking, communication capabilities, analytical skills, etc. But also now knowing these new age concepts wherein you know how to churn out these data faster, mold them into reports, ratios, uh, you know, an analysis which is more acceptable as a deliverable to the stakeholders, whoever we are catering to. Being aware of those efficient, I mean, being aware of the efficient skills, etc., to be able to, utilize our core learning and then turn it around with speed and elegance. So that is what is needed at the moment, according to me.
What about you, Shashadi?
Yeah.
Any advice for the students?
See, let me give you a sort of industry perspective on this, right? See, for me, I think all the students and the way finance has evolved, right? From a industry standpoint, I think a decade or 15 years back when I started my career, finance was more of a technical domain where domain knowledge was extremely important, right? So I would say finance person was a finance leader was a finance leader or a finance domain expert with business understanding, right? So that was how the role of finance was seen. Now, if you see, finance person is a business leader, right, with finance expertise. So the paradigm has shifted towards business. So my advice to all of you is to understand from a business angle, because even now, if you see all the way the panelists have spoken, it's a very well-rounded view of things. It's not a finance view on things. All the discussions which we have just had, it's not. So even though you will find, even if it was, say, reporting, ESG is still maybe a topic which is more, has business elements to it. Even if I were to give a topic of financial reporting standards, you will find the discussions to be very business oriented. What does it mean for the business and stuff like that? It's never about finance, and you will realize this once you start your career. Because once you get into a career, you are out of the entire value chain, out of the entire, say, puzzle. You are one element of it, trying to solve the entire thing. Right? You are one powerful element of it. Finance is a very important part of it. So for you, the advice would be is to understand business. No one stops you from trying to understand what is the value chain, how does a distributor function, how does the retailer function, what is a CFA, where is a manufacturing unit. Kanpur has a number of leather manufacturing units. Maybe all this red tape and others are there. How do they distribute it throughout India? So there are a number of things which you can know just even before starting your career, right? It's not necessary that once you get into your career and you need to learn this on job. And majority of the students, they actually don't. It's a very theoretical understanding of things without having a holistic perspective. So holistic perspective will always help throughout your career. So work on that aspect of understanding the business and getting a broader view, and then you will have a much sharper finance view. So don't restrict yourself to finance.
Thanks all the panelists. Yeah, great advice ranging from ESG to career as well. So yeah, once again, I would like to thank all the panelists. Really, it's your insights and your experience in this area has enriched us all. It was a pleasure to host you, and look forward to interacting with you all again soon. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for inviting us. It was pleasure.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Parvati,
everyone.
for the most cheerful way of moderating the panel. I'm sure that everybody has learned a lot out of it.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
For the
Bye-bye.
bye.
Ma'am,
Thank you,
so, we will conclude the session first. Then, yeah. So I thank all the panel members for sharing some wonderful insight on today's topic. The panel discussion has the importance of managing risk, and particularly penalties and financial risk. Speaker highlighted the need for organization to handle reputational risk, acknowledging their impact on long-term value creation, especially with a focus on environmental, social, and governance factors. The session also emphasized the correlation between the financial and ESG performance, emphasizing the role of strong risk management procedures in preventing greenwashing and ESG rationing for a transparent and responsible business approach.
Panel also talked about changing risk, focusing on worker safety and stakeholders' vision. Participants learn about how to identify ESG factors in the industries and why assessing future risk is crucial in a constantly changing environment. The session highlighted the importance of diversity, inclusion, and carbon emission awareness in shaping the company's risk profile and sustainability efforts.
A noteworthy segment of the panel discussion delved into the diligence required of ESG reporting and how organizations can enhance their transparency throughout robust reporting mechanism. The session progressed to a comprehensive exploration of ESG integration in merger and acquisitions, offering valuable insight into how business can align their strategic initiatives with sustainable practice to foster long-term success.
Finally, the panel concluded by discussing the connection between the risk management, ESG factors, and sustainable business practices. Attendees learned about handling penalty and financial risk, recognizing the link between financial and ESG performance, the significance of transparent reporting. The talks on the worker safety, stakeholders' vision, and advantage of ESG compliances highlighted the need for a well-rounded approach for organizations to success in today's ever-changing business world.
On this note, on behalf of MBA at IIT Kanpur, we would like to thank all our speakers for sparing their valuable time and enlightening us through their ideas expressed in this session, where the ESG financial risk assessment was discussed from all possible perspectives.
As a token of gratitude, we have planted saplings at Simipal National Park, Odisha, on your behalf, and we will share the certificates with you very soon. We would now like to conclude the session formally. Thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. See you soon.
Thank
See you
you.
soon. Thank you.
Bye.